Welcome to Sudaland. I'm your host, Premier Zinniop of House Redline. Let's not get into the actual world building because it's held together by threads and focus on the language of Swedish. Swedish is an Anglic language spoken in Australia, which is called Sudaland in this setting, where it blended with French, as opposed to English, which remained largely separate from Romance sources. Well, continental Romance, to say nothing of Latin-influenced Irish. Basically, it's reverse English, a version of Old English that evolved with Norman influence. And with the coexistence of English, they add their biases into it, like runes and separable prefix verbs. And the spelling system is truly awful. Dutch people would look at it and laugh, which is actually what we're discussing today. More specifically, I'm going to finish with the names of the runes. If you weren't here last week, we named feoh, cattle or wealth, as valor, which means value and is from French valor. Uraj, an extinct relative of cattle, becomes orc, the mighty orca, and thurisaj, the thorn, becomes thur, thunder, related to Thor. Speaking of gods, next we have ansur, the gods themselves. Now, in Old English, the good old Ingvaeonic nasal spirant law removed the N and raised it to a long O, and os became the O rune, so they had to make a new A rune, which is fine. The old O rune got umlauted anyways, but back to Swedish. The direct descendant would be os, which isn't very exciting and has no cognate in English, which I don't think is a result of Norman influence. I think it's just because the Christians came in. So what are some alternatives? Well, there is the Latin ordain, but that's a verb, and I don't really want to do one with a suffix. Oracle, but because of strange non-roticity, that becomes the functional diphthong or, which is spelled with a short U. Offering, multiple church buildings, but that's not really cracking the original meaning of ansur, which is a particularly Norse concept. Maybe we should lean away from gods and towards heroes. So, ocker is an Australian slang word roughly comparable to bloke. It's from the name Oscar and is probably too neologist to work, but that leaves oath and omen. Swedish oath and omen. Not too exciting, let's just leave it at omen. Coming in hot, it's raido. Old English rad. Despite being pronounced raido and meaning ride, it gives modern English road and Swedish roer. It also gives raid via Scots. This word rad was pretty stretchy semantically and could mean a wagon, path, journey, lots of things. So there are a lot of options for replacing it, including but not limited to rush, race, route, and run for land, and rad, row, ram, and river for water. I do like rush, but it is historically hrush, which is something I didn't get to cover. This becomes kra, so krush. Also true for chla and chna. After that, I'll go with rur. Interestingly, it's completely a false friend to road. Next up, we carry the flame with kauna-tin, meaning torch, or stomach ulcer in Norse. Unfortunately, chin never made it to English. Before an N, it would probably be spelled chin, even though that's usually for open long E. But in Swedish, this becomes sin, which is a different letter. In the English version of this, I translated it as coal, just because I prefer to use existing words when possible. Most of the time, it's just been the modern cognate, so I haven't brought it up. Also, F was fairness, as in, like, beauty. Back to coal. We could just do coal or the French equivalent carbon, candle, or chandelle from French. And then there are kiln and kindling. The old French words start with cha, which becomes ta, but is still spelled with the same letter. Out of these, my favorite is the French version of candle, which would be chandel, using the front version of a to make it soft, and also palatal diphthongization or something. Nice. Next up is gyfu, Old English gyfu. Now, as you can tell, this doesn't make a g sound, so in some versions they added in ģēar to handle it, but I don't think that's necessary. Plus, the word gift is hard nowadays, anyways. Obviously, that's not the cognate, it would be English yiv, Swedish juv, but gift has the same meaning. Fortunately, Norman provides something better, because what greater gift is there than the grace of God? Old French gratia becomes Swedish grâce. Next up, the order is a little shaky, but I straightened it out into hægl, Old English hægl, English hail, Swedish haul. However, it doesn't really snow in Australia, especially not if you've restricted your alternate history scenario to the west, so we'll only be left with the memories of hail. The word I've chosen is whore, an old-timey term for white and also a clipping of hoarfrost. I could also do white, which is Old English wheat, Swedish heath, but there have been too many with a tap T. Also, it's an adjective, so whore it is. Next up is wynn, everyone's favorite X letter, not counting any of the others. Proto-Germanic wunjo, Old English wynn, Swedish wynn. W is still busy being a vowel, so V has to be the consonant. As far back as Proto-Germanic, this is unrelated to the verb to win, but the English round-row still uses the noun win as its letter W. There are Anglo-Norman options, such as ģēar, despite them not having a W sound, but the closest I found to the original meaning of joy would be a sense of wonder, which is Old English wunder and Zodiac wunder. You don't need to double the D after N, it's never tapped. Next up is nīed, becomes Old English nīed, English need, which is kind of a very abstract and verby noun nowadays. Plus the Zodiac is palatalized, so it becomes nūd, which is a different letter. To keep it in line with the meaning of something that you lack, we could do French nol. But French e also palatalizes and it's nul. We can always fall back on nothing, though that's a bit uncreative. Nudity is also palatalized. Naked is an adjective. Nadir is an astrological term from Arabic via Church Latin. And neglect is a modern Latin verb, which I said I don't want to use unless it's a churchy word. So, negative. Old French negative, Zodiac negative. Semantically, this means something like refusal or denial. Speaking of negative in terms of temperature, next is isar is. English ice, Zodiac is, but I will do a Norman word for this one. My original guess for H actually was hibernum, the Latin word for winter we see in hibernate. However, the Latin H was fully silent in Old French. The Old French H actually emerged from debuccalized F. Point being, the descendant of hibernum is Old French hiver, Zodiac ivar. Next up is two runes, actually ģēar and eihwaz. Now, honestly, it's a bit unclear what the second one was even doing, but in modern English, they became year and you, so I don't think it's too far-fetched that they swapped pronunciation. Also, I prefer having this rune in the name of the language. So, we start with eihwaz U. In English, this is used to represent the silent GH for historic ch, so I made it 8, which kind of fits, U being a very poisonous plant, and 8 being an inauspicious number in Germanic mythology, it being 1 before a complete set of 9. Also, I already had 6 trees. In Zodiac, it represents the sh sound in the language's name. The two most deathly words I could find for this one are shade and cemetery, which are Zodiac ģēar and scimitar. I've kind of gotten aversion to Australian shad, so scimitar wins out. Ģēar, which I kept as year, becomes jar in Zodiac, but I love changing them out, so I made it youth, which is also vaguely age and time related. I like it. It contrasts with hor, meaning old age. Peorþ is not recognized easily and has no cognate in English. It would be Perth in English if that matters, and peorþ in Zodiac. Rune poems give it a meaning similar to game, so I used English play, which did exist as a noun in Old English and would be Zodiac plar, but I opted for a Norman word praise, which is Zodiac prøj. Oh boy, everyone, put your hands together for algirs. Old English eolhs. This letter represents the ž sound that comes at the end of like every masculine noun and also disappeared in Old English and then was only used to transliterate Latin. But eventually Old English also developed a x sound, so I added x to the English rune row. The Zodiac x is more involved because it makes the ch sound that shows up everywhere, so the word elk, which eventually evolved into elk sedge, a kind of plant and may have been a deonym for some kind of elk god with a very limiting starting consonant. The best I could find is cow, which is Zodiac tu. It's a shame this is my other setting with the dinosaurs. It could have been tau. I am in charge of this video, actually. But if you aren't up to date with my channel, I landed on tur tier. While tier itself should, in theory, be tar, the verb to tear up would influence the vowel to the front.
The sun is the sun.
Ģēar, Old English Tju, is named after the Old Norse god of strength. We've kicked out Thor and Os, and so goes Tyr, replaced with a generic symbol of strength in English, the tree. The Zodiac goes for the somewhat stronger and more Norman-influenced tower. Now this is a Latin word with reflexes in both Old English and Norman, with Old English u fronting and palatalizing, and Norman u remaining back. So the Norman influence has to win out, and we're left with Zodiac tur. Birch becomes birch in English. Birch trees aren't native to Australia, but they do have beech trees, or at least false beech trees, and beeches, I guess. There's also bush and the Frankish doublet bois, but the one I went with is baobab, which is perhaps most dazzlingly native to Australia, from Arabic via Latin. Zodiac baobab, using the R as a silent letter to keep the A short. Mange or manige, or just Old English man, English man is next. Now, without person and people to get in the way, this just means human. But in Zodiac, it's probably shifted to meaning just a male, also with influence from male. So we'll try to make it more gender neutral. There are probably 3 different ways of interpreting it: the body, member, muscle, marrow; the consciousness, mind; and the personage, mortal, model, master, though that last one isn't exactly gender neutral. After reviewing these, I settled on marrow, Zodiac marg. It's a word that's traded meaning with brain. We can probably semantically fudge it a bit. Ehwaz, Old English eolhs, doesn't have a cognated modern English, though it would be a, although the word horse is perfectly fine, so we don't really need a replacement. Now, this should be a slam dunk with Latin equus, but every Romance language ended up with caballus instead of equus. In English, I went with elm, just ignoring the problem, but Norman does have options. ST words, which are ET in modern French, actually never gain the E prefix in Norman. Not that there aren't exceptions in estate establish, but stallion, spur, and squire aren't among those. Are there any good EST words? Estrogen! Now, estrogen is Latin and probably too modern, but estrus itself, heat, which does occur in horses, is a science word and could be loaned from Latin, so this rune is ēster, the meaning of which I have expanded to mating in general of animals. Lagu becomes lay in English, probably vis-a-vis lake, which is partially from English and partially from French, so I will use lak for Swedish and lay or law for English. Eihwaz, Ing, is the name of a Germanic deity who appears to be the same as Frey, the god of harvest, springtime, sunlight, the ruler of Alfheimers, with a magic boar and a boat that folds up. In English, I went with anger, having to do with emotions running high with lots of energy, but Swedish has words beginning with ñ, as we saw under negative. The best option is nu, French for cloud. I looked into something with nuptia, wife, but that's a short U and so becomes O in French and doesn't palatalize. Oh, thala, don't write it like this, that's a hate symbol. Like I said earlier, othala ēþel is the original O that got umlauted to which isn't necessary in English anymore. In Swedish, it represents the schwa and other reflexes of o, and is W for some reason instead of ēþel. I just like it better. It meant something like homeland or inheritance, a meaning I kept in English, but for Swedish, I simplified it to the entire earth. Daraj, die, stays as day in English, but I already had duration in mind for a period of time. To make it more palatable, I dropped off the endings to just Norman durats, which becomes Swedish durage. Perhaps I should have used the palatable j that's been haunting the narrative, but it's late as I'm writing this. Ansuj. Wait, didn't we already do Ansuj? Well, Ansuj is actually 3 runes in Old English for the 3 different kinds of A they had. The high A we already discussed as oak in English and omen in Swedish. The fronted A is ash and the back A is alder, neither of which are native to Australia. So we need to dig deeper into the meaning of these. Alder is famously found in swamps. There are a lot of words for that, none of which work. Alcove is modern French. Abyss and asylum are from Latin. Ambush is originally from embush. The 2 that work are absence and abri, which is a French word for shelter. Absence is too abstract, so I went with Swedish abri. Ash is famously the tree that produced the first human male, askr, hence the name. Leaning into that, I went with andr, meaning male. The last 3 runes weren't added until Old English. Our has something to do with death and is often compared to earth, giving it a meaning of something like burial ground. I'm running out of time and my lore still sucks, plus I'm very limited on words that even start with this sound, so we'll say the graves in Sutherland are watery, not earthen, and give it the name Uth from Uth, which is an Old English word for wave. Ur is a variant of Ur, which has no rune poem and thusly an unclear meaning, though it might be a bow, specifically one made of yew wood. I expanded it ever so slightly to be the entire universe, Swedish univars, and that's everything. Nope. Because K is soft before a front vowel, we need a version of it to be hard. Couldn't you just use a silent R or double it? That's right, it's Q-U, time! There is actually a rune for this, calc, which did a good job staying hard, idiot. But if chalk is soft, the closest reef builder would be the humble kelp. It's unclear why Old English kulp remained hard, but I'm certainly not going to soften it. So, Swedish kulp. So the 29 rune alphabet is valor, ork, thur, omen, rur, candle, gras, hor, wunder, negativ, ivar, himiter, youth, praise, tu, sun, tur, bahobob, marg, ēster, lak, nu, earth, juras, abri, ander, youth, univars, and kelp. And that's the video. Zoiets kan niet echt zijn. Lowlanders will Swedish and have the same reaction as in Bobby looking their cocomelon. They clap their hands and drill over leaders that look funny in their piney brains.